Okay, Econ students, here we go. We are going to talk about Roman numeral 2, the economic cost, where we look at the evidence of the choices that we make. Through some of the previous lessons, we have already talked about the importance of making choices and why we do. Now we're going to talk about some of the things that we see in practical everyday life of choices that are made. We need to begin by defining what is a good and what is a service. So when we think about it in economic terms, an economic good is something that is tangible. You can hold it in your hand, and it has a measurable lifespan. For instance, that Starbucks Frappuccino that is shown up on the screen right there has a very measurable lifespan where it is going to exist in my hand for only a few moments before it is consumed. So I can hold it in my hand. It has a measurable lifespan that's only going to exist for a small amount of time, and then it's going to be done with. And then we also need to understand that in order to be called an economic good, it must have a price tag more than 0. There are other items that are considered free goods, which we'll talk about in a moment, but for it to be an economic good in this situation has to have a price tag more than 0. There is a cost involved into it. And so my question always is, when we're trying to determine, is it a good or is it a service, ask the question, could you hold this in your hand? I know you are going to think of an exception. I know there's some of you that in your mind right now that there's something coming through that you're thinking, well, wait, what about this? So this does not apply all the time, but most things, if you ask yourself the question, can you hold it in your hand? That will help you determine whether it's an economic good or an economic service. So let's talk about services for just a moment. And just like an economic good was a tangible thing that has a measurable lifespan, an economic service is an intangible item. A lot of times this is a duty or it's a service that is performed. So for example, you might have a service like teaching. So I am performing an economic service to you. I am teaching you about this lesson. Your parents are paying for this education that you're receiving. And so I am in the economic service business. And I want you to think for just a moment here. Again, one more time here, this does have to have a price tag more than 0, and once again ask the question, can you hold it in your hand? So I want you to think a little bit about the job that you have, if you have a job or you had a job over the summer, or if you didn't, maybe think about what your parents do and evaluate, do they perform an economic service or do they provide an economic good? There are some occupations where you do a little bit of both, where you perform a service and you provide a good, but this is our two major areas where we are looking at the economy at a ground level, determining if it's an economic good or an economic service. Let's move on here to the next slide before I get too far ahead of myself. Each one of these items is going to have an economic cost. And as we illustrated in the simulation we did in class previously, where you had to exchange items, there was a cost involved. Unless you found somebody that just wanted to give away his or her stuff for free, you had to give up something in exchange for what you wanted. And so when we look at economic cost, we are talking about the value that the people place on a good or service and the price that they are willing to pay. So it's always reflected in the price. If somebody holds a higher value to something, then they're going to request a higher price. Now, you may not be willing to pay that higher price, and therefore no agreement's going to be made and a trade is not going to happen. But for everything, there is an economic cost, and it is really important for us to consider that economic cost before jumping into a purchase or an exchange of something. And that's part of what I want you thinking about in your projects that you are researching, is what is the economic cost? And a lot of times that comes down to money. We are buying something and that is our economic cost. But I want you to think even further than that, not only the money, but what are the items that you're going to have to give up in order to purchase those brand new things that you are researching? Because everything has multiple economic costs. I told you a little bit ago we're going to talk about free goods and services, so here they are. These are items that have a price tag of 0. Now, you're not going to see these very often, but on occasion you will have free goods and services, and I'm not really talking about when you find somebody giving away something free on Craigslist. What I'm talking about here are things like wind or water. And yes, I know that we pay for running water in our homes, so please don't message me on that one. But we're talking about things that don't cost anything in their natural state. So sunlight, those type of things would be free goods, free services. We're not going to deal a whole lot with those, but I think it's important that you're aware of what they are and why they're there. Now, we also can look at a couple other aspects of goods and services. There's something here called positive goods and services. Positive goods and services have a price tag higher than zero, and they have a positive economic cost. Okay, so these are going to do good things for the economy, or they're going to do good things for you, and you are excited to pay for them because there's something that you are going to benefit, you're going to enjoy because of paying for these positive goods and services. On the flip side, we have something called nuisance goods and services. So positive goods and services make us feel good about the purchase that we made. We get a lot of satisfaction and enjoyment from those things. A nuisance good and service kind of does the opposite. It's where you have certain items that you no longer want, but you are going to have to pay to get rid of those things. So your satisfaction comes in the removal of those items. Garbage is a pretty prime example of that. If we didn't pay for garbage removal, and some of you, your parents pay that through their taxes, then we would have garbage piling up. Or we'd be responsible to dispose of it ourselves. Maybe some of you are out in the country and you have that type of situation where you burn your garbage or you have other ways to dispose of it. But for most of us, we are paying somebody to remove that garbage out of our lives, and so that's a nuisance good and service. Many companies and businesses are going to have a large expense here when it comes to their waste product that they're going to have to pay to get rid of, especially if it's hazardous to the environment. There's a lot of regulation about that. And so they're not really gaining a whole lot, but they are getting the removal of that, and so that would be considered a nuisance good or service. Recycling is another important aspect here. It's where you are going to take those nuisance goods and you are going to transform them into something positive. So I'll say that one more time. It's where you're going to take a nuisance good and you're going to transform it into a positive good. And that's the whole element of recycling. And yes, a lot of times that does provide good things for our environment that we often think of. Recycling is good for the earth and that type of thing. But that's really on the economic side of things. We're taking something that is not desirable, we want removed out of our lives, out of our business, and we're going to turn it into something positive that can be used productively. Now, I've got another short video in the Canvas page that is on the paradox of value, and I need for you to pause this video here, maybe open up another tab on your computer, watch that video before you continue on in this one. So pause here and then pick up and continue this video after watching the paradox of value video. So at this point, you should have watched that video. If you didn't, there's going to be some key information here that you're going to be missing out on because it explains a little bit about the idea of intrinsic versus subjective value. So the question is asked in that video, which is more valuable, diamond or water? And when we think about economic value, immediately most of us are going to be thinking, well, I would take a handful of diamonds in a heartbeat. However, if the situation changes and you are on your last breath and you're out in the middle of the desert and you need a glass of water for survival, well, in that case, the handful of diamonds are not going to do you any good. So your values have changed, and that brings up the question about intrinsic or subjective value. Go back once again and looking at this question, it was solved back in the 1870s by Carl Menger. His last name is M-E-N-G-E-R, You should include him in your notes if you've not already. And he wrote a book called Principles of Economics, where he said there's not one value for every good. So when we see a price tag on something, that is not the only value, and most of us are familiar with that, and that's why I'm having you do comparison shopping in your projects, is because one store may value that and may have a price tag on a particular appliance, where another store may have a different value, and you need to figure out which one you think is more accurate. Usually you're going to pay for the lower priced one. So Carl Menger, he solved that by saying there's not just one value for every good. The situation or the buyer or the seller has their own value on that. And so we need to understand a couple of concepts when it comes to value. One of those is intrinsic value. Intrinsic value states that the nature of the product makes the item valuable because of exactly what it's made out of and the material and how hard it is to harvest or to produce it. So because of its nature, the product is valuable. And then when we look at the nature of it, we combine that with scarcity and labor that go into producing that product, and we say, well, that's valuable because of the nature of it. So most of us think of things like diamonds as being intrinsically valued, or we think of things like expensive electronics, like a cell phone or a laptop, might be intrinsically valuable because of all the materials that go into creating it or the labor that goes involved in that. We might say that has intrinsic natural value to that. And so that's why in this particular illustration, diamonds would be considered to have a lot of intrinsic value and the water none, because water is usually considered a free good. So what Carl Menger said is that no good or service is intrinsically valued, or does not have any sort of intrinsic value, and the worth is always determined by the usefulness to the buyer. And so if there's no value there for a purchaser or a buyer, then there's not going to be an exchange made. Now, subjective value, and here I do have Carl Menger here on the slides, in his book Principles of Economics. Here he is going to remind us that there's more than one economic value for every good, and every good's value differs from person to person. eBay is a quality example of this. As you look at the different items that are on eBay and the amount that people are willing to spend on particular items, it's always a good idea to know what the going rate for a computer or electronic or whatever it is that you're wanting to buy off of eBay before you start bidding. I remember one of my first experiences with eBay was purchasing a computer, and I had my eyes set on a particular one, and I had shopped around my local stores and I knew the price it was to buy it new, and I was looking to buy one that was a couple of years older, and I searched eBay and got some comparisons, and I started bidding. And I thought I was going to get a really great deal, about $200 less than I could find this computer anywhere else, until the last 15 minutes of the auction. And then I start to see people start bidding me up, and the value just keeps going up and up and up. And eventually got to the point where I said, enough's enough, I'm going to stop bidding. It has reached the value that I'm no longer willing to spend, and so I gave up on that particular computer. I then went back a few days later, I found another one very similar, I bid on that one, and that one I was able to get at the value that I had on that computer. But somebody was willing to pay more for that first computer than what I was, so the values there didn't line up based off of the amount of money that I was going to have to sacrifice for that. And it can go with a number of different things. Some of you value certain things more than others, so think about what you invest your money into. Some of you may have a car and you put a lot of money and care into that car, while others may not have a car. And so you don't spend your money there, and your values are different. Some of you may be putting money into electronics and you spend a lot of money there, or on video games and you put money in there, while others would say that would be a waste of my money because I would receive no satisfaction. And that's why there would be subjective value in all of those things. So value can also depend on the state of mind of the individual. Again, this is where the desert and the glass of water comes in. So your life situation may determine the value you have on certain things. So right now in your current life situation, you may not place a whole lot of value on buying a life insurance policy. You might have one. That's a conversation that we'll have later on in this class. But when you get a little bit older and you have a family, a house, kids, then a life insurance policy should be one of those things that has a lot of value to you, where you're going to spend money on that to help make sure that you are going to properly take care of your family. Again, a conversation for another time, but it depends on the state of mind or the life situation of the individual. So it comes down to this. The worth of everything is determined by its usefulness or utility to the buyer. That word utility right there is something that economists use to help explain how useful something is. And so you'll see that come back throughout the semester where we'll talk about utility. And that is simply a way to determine how useful or how valuable in economic terms that we are going to describe something. So make sure that you keep that in mind as we go along. Every time that you make a choice, there is an opportunity cost that goes along with that, and that is what helps us make smart choices when we consider that opportunity cost. Now, before we get into opportunity cost, it's important to understand the benefit. When you're presented with an option to buy something, you are always weighing the benefit or the satisfaction that you're going to receive from acquiring that object or that service. That is called your opportunity benefit. It's a satisfaction you receive from a choice. So, if I'm going to walk into a donut shop and I'm going to make a choice to put down my money and I'm going to buy that donut that is chocolate glazed, and today I happen to be in the mood for one with a little bit of bacon sprinkled on top. So I'm going to choose that chocolatey bacon donut. And for those of you who have never tried that, that is an experience you need to have. So that's my opportunity benefit, and I'm going to receive a lot of enjoyment from eating that donut. I also have to count the opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is the satisfaction that you give up by not selecting the other choices. So again, go to my donut example here. I have selected the chocolate donut with the bacon sprinkled on top, but in order to buy that one, I had to give up my second favorite donut, or my second choice that day, which could be a cinnamon roll. And so that cinnamon roll is now my opportunity cost. As I look at the case and I see both of those side by side, and I'm thinking, boy, both of those sound really good today. But I don't need two donuts. I maybe don't have money for two donuts. I've got to pick one. I get the most satisfaction out of the chocolate and bacon donut. I would get second most satisfaction out of the cinnamon roll. Now, the cinnamon roll is so good, and there's a little part of me that might be a little sad that I left that cinnamon roll sitting all by itself in the case right there, and a little bit guilty for doing that. That's my opportunity cost. I would love to have that, but I can't buy both right now. That's something that we need to think about in every economic decision that we make. If we decide that we're going to go out and we're going to buy lunch in the cafeteria today, well, that may mean that you're not going to have enough money for a snack after school. That could be your opportunity cost. It could be something like buying a house. If you buy a house and you have to put a large down payment on that, it could mean that you have to sacrifice a vacation this summer because you used that money on the down payment for your house. So your lost vacation, or your missing out on the vacation, is your opportunity cost, and your new house is your opportunity benefit. So a rational person, when you are looking at these choices, is going to make the choice that gives you the greatest satisfaction and that overwhelms, or that puts in perspective the regret of the opportunity cost. If you make a decision where the opportunity cost regret is greater than the opportunity benefit, that's called buyer's remorse, and that's usually not a good thing. And that's where experienced shoppers are going to think through all this before they make a decision. And you want to weigh both the benefits and the cost of that decision before you go ahead and do that. So again, I put rational person on there. Somebody's going to come back and they're going to come up with some example that totally blows us out of the water because you're thinking of the non-rational person. So rational person, the economist, the smart buyer, is going to look at all those things. Most of these choices are made on a subconscious level. We don't always sit there and write out a pro and con list, although that might not be a bad idea. But when we make choices, even from the small ones, we're always weighing the opportunity cost and opportunity benefit. Even things like dressing up for Spirit Week, you are weighing the opportunity cost and the opportunity benefit. The benefit is that you can help your team win, you can have a lot of fun doing it, you can be part of the group. The cost may be the extra hours that you spend working on those costumes. The cost may be literal cost and financial investment into producing a costume. The cost may also be the risk of kind of looking silly once in a while. But you got to weigh the cost and the benefit. And being part of the school and showing your school spirit hopefully weighs a higher benefit than those other costs are involved in there. And most of you probably didn't think through all those things, more on the subconscious level anyway. But every decision that you make has hidden costs. And I want you to start thinking through all of those hidden costs when you're doing your projects. So don't just look at the sticker price. I want you in your analysis to think through, what are the hidden costs? What am I not thinking about? What am I going to have to give up in order to buy this? And that's really important to start thinking like an economist that way. We do measure satisfaction through utility, and the measurable unit is called a util. I don't make this up. This is the way it works. It's called a util. Just like we measure distance in feet or miles, or if you're part of the rest of the world in the metric system, we measure satisfaction in economics by utils. So let me give you one more example here to help you understand this. If we were to go out and let's say that you had $10 to spend, and you decided that you were going to, there's a book that you really wanted to go out and you want to read and you want to enjoy. That book there is going to give you 5 utils of satisfaction. You walk past the bookstore, you're about ready to walk in there and buy that book for $10. You notice next door that there's a pizza shop, and it's about lunchtime, and you're hungry, and you could get a pizza for $10. Well, you can't do both. You can't do the book and the pizza. You got to decide which is going to give you the most satisfaction. As you start weighing those options, well, you've been looking forward to reading that book for a long time. You're also really hungry right now. And that book is going to give you 5 utils of satisfaction, and the pizza right now in your current state of mind, your hunger, is going to give you 7 utils of satisfaction. And in your mind you're thinking, okay, well, I also get paid for my job in 2 days, so I could probably come back and buy that book in 2 more days. And so you're weighing those opportunity costs and opportunity benefits. And a rational person is going to use that utility scale. It's going to say, well, I get 2 more utils of satisfaction by buying the pizza. I'm going to buy the pizza now. I'll wait on the book. Hopefully that helps you understand and gives you a little bit more perspective into that.